As if the McCrispy couldn't get any better, Bacon and Ranch just entered the chat. The Bacon Ranch McCrispy, available at participating McDonald's for a limited time. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
This episode is brought to you by Blizzard. Play Diablo 4 free during the open beta weekend. Only you can stand in the way of the forces of hell. Play free March 24th to 26th and pre-purchase for early access. Journey through the entire first act. Battle up to level 25 as all 5 classes. Adventure with your friends in 4-player co-op. Descend into hell early during the open beta. Pre-purchase Diablo 4 now.
This feels just like a Friday. Nice, calm, cool. It's a little rainy if you're in Cincinnati, although we did have some thunderstorms, but it's Friday, it's chilled, we're chill, and we're chilling with you right here. Welcome into another off-season edition of the Strictly Stripes podcast. Muhammad Ahmad and Andrew Gillis tag teaming once more as Mike Nizick enjoys his little time off. And like we've been talking about all week, Andrew, we graded the Bengals in free agency. We graded how they did compare to the AFC North. We talked about possibilities of where Jonah Williams could end up if the Bengals entertained a trade. But, you know, with all of that said, I wanted to kind of wrap up, not just this week. I kind of want to wrap up March, although technically I have a week left. But I think we're sort of in that transition period between the weaning phase of free agency to the draft. And so, you know, for those listening, we've obviously done our grades and we've kind of assessed our grades and explained why. But I guess if you just kind of look at the moves the Bengals made this month, you know, and really you could go all the way back to the combine, like hearing Duke Tobin talk, Zach Taylor talk. What have you personally learned about the Bengals in this free agency period? And what is so important to know about this month for the Bengals, not just heading into the draft, but the offseason as a whole, to the best of like kind of what you've seen?
Yeah, you know, I think, you know, we kind of knew this, but they've kept an eye on the future as well as kind of building for the now. And I think they did a somewhat decent job of that this offseason. You know, what they did was, you know, they brought in Orlando Brown. You know, and I thought that kind of makes sense because you get, you know, fairly solid left tackle at a position of, you know, frankly need because, you know, Jonah Williams is entering a contract year and obviously who knows what's going on with him right now. But, you know, you upgrade your left tackle. I think he's an upgrade. Orlando is over Jonah. So you upgrade your left tackle position, but you also get it for 4 years. And frankly, you're probably paying about the number that you would expect to pay Jonah. You know, I think that you can kind of make the case, oh, well, they made a big splash. Well, you know, you were probably going to have to pay Jonah something comparable if you were going to keep Jonah next offseason. So, you know, I thought they did a good job. They made the offensive line the priority. But, yeah, you know, I think they're going to try and go young. And I think that you look at kind of where this roster is now and kind of what this roster is going to be in 2024 and 2025, Joe Mixon's not going to be around forever. And whether that's, you know, I know there's been talk about cutting him this offseason, but, you know, he's not going to be around forever. You know, I think it's pretty clear they're going to go young at running back. I think it's pretty clear they're going to go young at tight end. They're going to make some youthful additions here over the next couple of weeks, whether that be in the draft or free agency. And, you know, I think that they, you know, they're starting to kind of recognize and they're starting to prepare for, you know, adding around Burrow as best you can, because when Burrow signs that deal, whenever that is, things are going to change pretty quick.
You know, you really just spoke kind of what I was thinking is, you know, it was the opposite the last couple of years. Like, beyond drafting Jamar Chase, you know, after they got Burrow and Higgins the year before, like, the Bengals have really gone old. I mean, they bring in Von Bell, they bring in Hayden Hurst, like, guys who are closer to their 30s at this point, Trey Hendrickson. You know, they extended Sam Hubbard, but, like, although I think Hubbard's going to be around the longest out of all the current linemen, he's not that much younger. I mean, he's still going to be 28 this year. So, I mean, he's close to his 30s, too. I mean, it feels like forever ago he got drafted out of Ohio State. So, you know, it was all about building on your depth from an age standpoint, you know, from older guys, veteran guys. That's not going to be the case anymore because, number one, I mean, you can't really afford to. The Burrow extension era, the Brown deal, and let's be real, like, I think we'd be remiss to say that, like, they're going to extend Jamar Chase next year. I mean, it almost has to happen. Whether or not it's T. Higgins, I don't know, or Logan Wilson, they're going to extend Jamar Chase, and that only shores up even more cap space. So I think that's sort of the new, if you want to say there's a new chapter, like going into 2023 I'm just kind of eyeballing like the next 3-4 years, you're going from getting veteran players to youthful players. Like, youth is the theme. Expect them to really build on their future in this year's draft and in next year's draft. But, you mentioned the offensive line, and this is something they've been working on for really the last 2 years. I mean, you could say 3, but I mean, last year and this year, those 2 years is really where they've spent the most resources building around Burrow. I mean, if you're Joe Burrow, you've been in Cincinnati for 3 years, you're going into year 4. Is he going to have the best offensive line he's ever had in his NFL career?
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. I think it's relative, and I think you kind of need to kind of quantify, or excuse me, not quantify. I think you need to qualify it with the saying that he can have the best offensive line that he's had, but it might not be what. Yeah, he can have the best offensive line that he's had in his career, but it might not be kind of an elite offensive line. I'm not going to say that, they're going to be like Philadelphia's offensive line or anything like that. And frankly, there's still questions along the offensive line. How does Orlando Brown integrate to the offense? Do he and Cordell Volson kind of make a nice pair on that left side? What happens at right tackle? Is Jonah Williams here? And if he's here, how does he move over to the right side? Does that transition happen seamlessly? Where there's some growing pains? Do they stay healthy? There's a lot of questions about about the offensive line. I think it's you can absolutely say it's the best front five he's had in his career. I think that's totally fair. I think that's correct. But I also think that, sometimes that sentence alone kind of might be painting it with too optimistic of a brush because, yes, it's true, but I think it kind of leaves you to the conclusion that, his offensive line is really, 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 really good now. And I think that they're probably, like you said, the best offensive line that he's had in his career, but I'm not willing to put them, in the elite category or even the great category. I think, it's a good offensive line if you have Jonah Williams at right tackle and that situation kind of works. If Jonah plays well at right tackle, I think you're feeling pretty good about where you're at. I just I don't know if that's kind of the way that I would describe it.
So you're saying on paper they could have the best line they've had in 3 years on paper, because obviously like Trey Hopkins, Quentin Spain, like, who aren't even in the league anymore, is nowhere near as good as having Orlando Brown, Ted Karras, Cordell Volson, who have all come in, Alex Kappa. But you're saying that it's not about what the Bengals have on paper, it's about what can these guys on paper translate on the field. Like, you're saying we still just don't really know how good this line can be when they're on the field. Like, they're just, questions like you said, but we just don't know until we know is what you're saying.
Well, yeah, but I think even if the offensive line comes together, if Orlando Brown is as advertised, there's still questions, and I'm I don't think anybody's going to sit here and say that they're a top end or a top echelon, top 2, top 3 offensive line in the league right now. They're better than they were a year ago, certainly, because if you're going to add Orlando Brown. And still kind of keep Jonah Williams, that matters, and they'll be better. But I think sort of you're right in saying that, that you have to see it kind of in action. But even if everything hits, like even if everything works out, I just don't. I think they're going to be good. I would caution any fans thinking, this is
like this is
an elite offensive
set.
line. Yeah, this is the next coming of the Hogs or the Killer Bees or something like that. I don't know how many people are saying that, but it's a good offensive line, but there are still kind of things that you need to work out.
Well, I think that temperament that you mentioned is important too, because I understand when you look at the fact that he was the 6th most sacked quarterback last year and the most sacked quarterback the year before, when they ironically made the Super Bowl with the line that was nowhere near as good as it was last year or this year. I get there's this feeling of like, okay, we've reached the mountaintop. Like, no more backyard Burrow getting thrown to the ground. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, we're just playing in the backyard. Like, he's going to be like Tom Brady in the pocket, just chilling. That's not quite the case. And obviously, it'd be nice if it was Patrick Mahomes, where like the play is never dead, or with Josh Allen, where you're a 6'5", 240-pound tight end body like quarterback running guys over. And again, this is not a knock on Burrow, by the way. This is just reality. Like you've always said before, like if there's a reason why Mahomes is the number 1 quarterback over Burrow, which I mean he is, but if there's a reason why, it's because. And granted, Mahomes is a little bit more spoiled than Burrow with his offensive line because he had Orlando Brown for 2 years and other guys on that line like Creed Humphrey. But I think even if you took those guys away, like the play's never dead with him. I mean, even in the Super Bowl, like I'll kind of bring up a point that you made, and I agree with you on this. Even though the Buccaneers crushed Kansas City in the Super Bowl 2 years ago, there were times where like he was just throwing the ball. Like, how did he get that out? Or how did he keep the play alive? Even if it didn't end the way they wanted it to because they lost by, 22 points in that game. He still showed that, like, if you're going to make him lose by 22, you got to really make him lose by 22. And with Burrow, it's like, I mean, imagine if you gave him that offensive line that the Chiefs had in that Super Bowl, but you put in Burrow instead of Mahomes. It could be an even bigger loss for all we know. So, and again, I think that's kind of the idea, too, is that, like, a lot of this isn't just on the offensive line. The point I'm making is Joe Burrow has gotten better about taking sacks. Like, if you look at the sacks he took in 2021 versus last year, and I think he'll admit this, he's even said this before, in interviews, and he said it on a podcast after the Super Bowl last year, like, some of those sacks were his fault. Like, he might have stayed in the pocket too long, might have missed a read, didn't get the check down he was looking for, and he didn't really do what he needed to do after that. So I think you have to combine it with not just, is this the Bengals' best offensive line, but is this the best collective, unit that they've had with Burrow? Like, is this the most synchronized line, I should say? Because it all comes down to Burrow, his cadence, his rhythm, his flow. Like, are we going to see the best flow and rhythm from Burrow? Because we got to remember, this is his first full year with no surgery, no ACL recovery, no COVID. Because, like, what it was COVID, recovering from the ACL, the appendectomy surgery last year, none of that, bearing anything crazy happening. So, I mean, do you agree it's kind of important to realize that, like, it's not just about kind of what the offensive line does, but how synced it is with Joe Burrow?
Yeah, I mean, you could kind of make the case, too, that, quarterbacks, quarterback sacks are just as much a quarterback stat as they are an offensive line stat. And kind of like everything, stats are not always created equal. An interception at the end of a half on a Hail Mary, is not the same as an interception, where you overthrow the receiver by 5 yards, and, kind of the same thing if it's, a 3rd down and 2, or 3rd down and 6 or whatever at the opponent's 15-yard line, and you're trying to run around and make a play happen because you need 7. Taking a sack there is different than taking a sack on 1st and 10. So yeah, it is on the quarterback too. And I think sometimes kind of offensive lines, do get a little bit of blame for sacks that they really shouldn't.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. And to that as well, I would say that, we just really don't know till we know. Like, we can assume and we can make sense of, like, past trends of, okay, the line got better, Burrow's getting better. But again, we just don't know how much better or if he'll get any better, if the line will get any better until we see them, until we go to training camp or OTAs, I guess, mini camps, and we see how these guys look. It's hard to say. So we're just kind of speculating, but, it's the off season. It is what it is. But the other side of that I wanted to look at on the Bengals as far as like how well improved will this unit be, that I feel like I should have brought this up sooner. Maybe we talked about it, but it's not as much as we could have talked about it. And that's on the defensive side, the linebacking room. You're bringing back Jermaine Pratt for 3 more years. Logan Wilson's on a contract year, so whether he gets extended or not, he's going to be back in 2023. Akeem Davis-Gaither's going to be behind Wilson. And I'd imagine, at the very least, Davis-Gaither will have the same role he had last year if he doesn't get more snaps. I guess you could say Marcus Bailey too, although he was used even less last year, depending on the packages they use. But the point I'm making is, you have 2 linebackers who have played together for 3 years going into their 4th season. You don't see a lot of that in the NFL right now in terms of like continuity between like 2 or 3 true linebackers, because normally it's 3 or 4, but the Bengals run a 5-2 versus a 4-3-3-4. So it's where they're a little bit unique. But as far as like these two, Pratt and Wilson, with all the success they've had, back-to-back AFC championships, playing in a Super Bowl, like both of those guys are a big reason why the Bengals went to the Super Bowl. 2021, they both had game-winning picks. Pratt against the Raiders, Wilson against the Titans, and they both made, just as big plays in this past season. Is it fair to say that Wilson and Pratt could be a top 5 linebacking duo in 2023?
I think it's possible for sure. You kind of look at some of the other linebackers, across the league. San Francisco's obviously got a really, really good linebacking core. I think the question basically is, are 2 really good linebackers or fairly good linebacker, however you want to classify, Logan Wilson and Jermaine Pratt, do they kind of outrank a Fred Warner, Bobby Wagner, Roquan Smith? Like how would you, it's kind of that question, Roquan Smith, I think it's fair to say, and I don't think anybody would disagree, that Roquan Smith would be the best linebacker on the Bengals right now. I think that's fairly obvious. So it's like, how do you rank a Roquan Smith and a Patrick Queen versus a Logan Wilson and a Jermaine Pratt? So, I think they absolutely can. I'm really curious to see kind of their usage this year. There was obviously the third down stuff with Jermaine Pratt and kind of how he didn't want to come off the field, how he really wanted to play, pretty much every snap. And that's going to be interesting because, you got, if you're going to run with 4 down linemen and 5 corners, you got 2 linebackers on the field. That's Logan Wilson and Jermaine Pratt. But what happens if you need to go into more of a dime look and you need an extra DB out there? Or you're playing a team that really, you're playing a team that runs 4 wide or something like that. Like I'm curious to see kind of what their usage is like just in general. But yeah, I think it's possible for sure. It's just, I think the question isn't, can they be a top 5 linebacking core? I think the preeminent question is, can one of them kind of elevate their play and keep elevating their play? I think it's fair to say they've gotten better. Can one of them keep elevating their play so that, they become, a top, however you want to phrase, top 10 linebacker in the league, top 8, whatever unit of measurement you want to use. I think that's kind of the operative question, because if you can get that, then I think you can have some really, really, really special play out of your linebacking core.
Yeah, it's a good one because, like, you mentioned Roquan Smith. He's also got Patrick Queen next to him, who I think is great. Just ask Joe Burrow. He played with him in college, and Patrick Queen seems to have his number almost every time they play each other. So, yeah, Queen and Smith is a good one. I'm really interested to see what T.J. Edwards and Tremaine Edmonds look like in Chicago. That's going to be fascinating to see, because I think that was really smart on the Bears' part. With the way they're building their defense, I think that's a good duo. And yeah, there's some other ones down the list that kind of stick out, but not to the degree that those do, unless I'm forgetting about some names. But I don't know. I think it's going to be interesting to see. Like you said, are they going to be a top 5 duo, or are they just going to play the best that they've played? And I think they'll ascend. They're getting better. They're going into, like I said, year 4 together. Pratt is going into year 5 because he was drafted the year before Wilson was. So, they're both good at creating turnovers. Pratt's one of the best coverage linebackers in the league. He had the highest PFF grade in coverage last year at his position. So you have that in his favor. Wilson's not as savvy in coverage, but he's savvier than your average linebacker, if you want to give him some praise there. Maybe not the hardest hitting linebackers, but they'll definitely force turnovers like Pratt did against Travis Kelce when they played the Chiefs last year. So I'm definitely looking forward to that. But let's just thinking about that as we kind of spin forward 2023 and what the Pratt signing means. But when we come back, we're going to look at some of the biggest questions for the Bengals going into next week and next month, particularly in the draft, potential answer to those questions and what they mean when we come back right here on the Strictly Stripes podcast. Hey there, it's Muhammad Ahmad from the Strictly Stripes podcast, and if you still don't know what Cincinnati Football Insider is, listen up. It's a community of fans who want the inside scoop on the Bengals and a direct connection to the podcast and the reporters who cover the team. Here's how it works. Andrew, Mike, and I will text your phone a few times a day with breaking news, analysis, and our insights on the Bengals, and it's the inside scoop on what we're hearing, and we're giving you the inside word before it even hits social media. If you join Cincinnati Football Insider, you get to participate on the podcast, and you can text us directly. It's a great way to cut through the clutter of social media for just $4.99 a month. Still not sure? Just try it for 2 weeks, and if you don't like it, you can text the word STOP at any time, but you won't want to cancel once you join the community of hardcore Bengals fans. So here's how you get on board. Text 513-940-4193 or go to cleveland.com/Bengals and click on the blue banner at the top of the page. It's a great time to join as we're covering the NFL Draft, OTAs, mini camps, and much more to come later this year. So give us a try for 2 weeks and see what you think. Just text again the number 513-940-4193. All right, and thanks for staying with us on the Strictly Stripes podcast. So, Andrew, we looked at kind of our thoughts to sort of wrap up March, transition to April. But beyond kind of our final thoughts, I wanted to ask a few of the biggest questions, particularly going into next week, which, today is the 24th. We're taping this on a Friday. Next week is when April starts, next Saturday to be exact. So I think it's not too early to look ahead to that. I think one of the biggest questions I have is, we've talked about this so much, but it's a little bit different asking this now because a lot has changed in the last week for the Bengals. But with Foster Moreau's cancer diagnosis, which, by the way, praying for him, wishing him nothing but a speedy recovery against a battle like that. But, he's out of the running because of his Hodgkin's lymphoma diagnosis. Austin Hooper goes to the Raiders. And if you look at the rest of, the market for free agent tight ends, there's really no one that sticks out. And it's a pretty, the average age is closer to 30 versus other positional classes where it's younger. I mean, with everything that's kind of unfolded in free agency and with, Foster Moreau's health, does this sort of point to the fact that we're not going to see the Bengals get a tight end until the draft this year?
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's completely fair to say, hey, look, this team, needs a tight end, and they're going to go to the draft. But I also think that they need two. So maybe that is, Drew Sample's still out there, and he's only 26 years old. Maybe you're bringing him back. Mitchell Wilcox is 26 years old. You'd be getting two guys that they kind of know the system. They know the team, obviously, and I think that I wouldn't want to go into a season needing two tight ends or go into a draft needing tight ends like in this type of way. I think you could kind of make the case that, hey, look, if that's their plan at running back, where they have Joe Mixon, they lost Samaje Perine, they have Travion as kind of their number 3, and you need a guy who could handle some pass blocking snaps and a guy who could take some carries from Mixon. I think that's kind of I don't know. You could probably split some hairs on that. Maybe they should have gone after this guy or this guy in free agency, but I think that's fair to say. Tight end, I do think they need a veteran. I think you need somebody there, even if it's a Drew Sample or a Mitchell Wilcox. Somebody who can be your 2 or 3 tight end. Because if you go into a draft and unless you're going to elevate one of the guys that you had. One of you guys you had in the practice squad last year, you think of like a Nick Bowers or something like that. Like unless you're going to elevate somebody like that and kind of have that guy be your third tight end, I just think that you need a tight end. You need a tight end before you go into the draft, just to give yourself some leeway. Because what are you going to do if you have? Obviously we don't know their draft board, but Michael Mayer's their number 1 tight end, Darnell Washington's number 2, and then they have they have Dalton Kincaid ranked 50th. I don't know. I'm just throwing out names and hypotheticals. And what are you going to do if Mayer and Washington are gone? I think you're kind of putting yourself in a bit of a hole if you go in needing to. So I think at tight end you need to add somebody in free agency over the next couple of weeks. But at running back, I think it's fine if you're just going to roll into the draft and say we'll find a guy there.
Yeah, I agree. They do need a veteran because you don't want to go in there with just a bunch of rookies trying to figure it out. Like whether it's Michael Mayer, Darnell Washington, you need somebody, whether it's getting one of those few guys on the market I mentioned for a cheap prove-it deal, or if it's, bringing back Hurst and – no, I'm sorry, not Hurst. He's gone, long gone. Kind of missed that guy. Wilcox or Sample. You're right. But, why do you think they haven't brought them back yet? Do you think they just haven't been able to come to a deal? Or I'm kind of shocked that, they didn't even – extend the tender to Wilcox. Why do you think that is? I'm actually somewhat shocked that they haven't brought one of those guys back by now.
Yeah, I think they kind of looked at it, and if I had to guess, they were trying to upgrade in free agency with a veteran. Obviously, they looked into Foster Moreau and kind of who else knows who they looked into. So I think they were probably trying to upgrade there. Get a nice veteran option, and then you add your guy in the draft. So they're still out there. They can still be brought in if you want to bring them back. So I think it's not too late on that, and I think they just swung a little further than them. See if they could get somebody they thought was an improvement, and but if not, I think they'd be okay bringing those guys back.
Both of them, or just one of them?
I would just bring one of them back because you've already got Devin Asiasi on the roster, and I'm not saying that he would even is a guarantee to make it through camp or anything like that. Considering he didn't really play a whole heck of a lot last year, so that's fine. But I would just bring one of them back, whichever one you think can be a nice number 2 option for you, and then you got to find your starting tight end in the draft.
Yeah, I think that's the likely trajectory we'll see on that. But kind of the last thing I wanted to ask about as far as big questions go is I saw that Samaje Perine spoke with, I think it was Parker Gabriel from the Denver Post, who covers the Denver Broncos. And, to kind of sum up what Perine said is that, I came to Denver because, he talked to Sean Payton. He talked about the system that Payton ran, where basically it sounded like, Perine might not be a starter, but he'll have a starter-like role with Javonte Williams, who's their third-year running back, which makes me wonder, number one, was he not happy with his role in Cincinnati? And of course, he didn't say anything bad about the Bengals. He even talked a lot about how much it was a tough decision to leave Cincinnati, to not, stick with Zach Taylor's system. But was he truly not as happy as he could have been with the Bengals? And then the bigger question, looking ahead, is, are other teams kind of looking at how he was used behind Joe Mixon relative to how Joe Mixon played? And are other free agents I'm not feeling it. I don't like that system. I don't really want to be a part of something like that. And instead they'd rather play for someone like Sean Payton, who's hey, you won't be a starter, but you're going to play like a starter. Kind of like he did with Alvin Kamara and Reggie Bush and the other guys behind them in New Orleans. Do you think that might be an issue for the Bengals? You think that's why Perine was I'm going out west?
No, I don't think so at all, actually. I think, Sean Payton is, obviously kind of known for his offensive prowess. But, Samaje Perine wants to handle more of a load, it sounded like, in the backfield and kind of get more carries and things like that. And Javonte Williams is coming back from a really, really serious knee injury that he suffered in October. I forget the exact injury, but, I do know that there were a lot of CLs in his knee torn, and he had, some pretty major surgery And I've seen, reports, and obviously, we're kind of speaking, a little bit ignorantly on that situation just because we don't know. But, I've seen a lot of reports where, he might not be ready until late in the season. He might be ready early in the season. But I mean, if you're Samaje Perine, you're looking at that situation as, hey, look, if Sean Payton gets Russ right, that defense is still pretty decent, and they've got good receivers, and I might have a chance to get some really significant carries. So, I think I don't know if it's anything to do with the Bengals. I just think he wanted a better opportunity.
But do you think other teams are going to look at kind of like how Brian Callahan and Zach Taylor split the reps between, Perine and Mixon, where, Perine played 41%, which was a career high for him, and then Mixon played somewhere near 57, 58%. Do you think they're going to look at that and say, with respect to the Bengals or with respect to their offense, I'm not really wanting to be a part of that? Do you think that might be hurting the Bengals right now?
No, not really at all. I think that, if you're a running back right now that gets drafted to the Bengals, I think you look at the situation right now at run, if you're a free agent running back looking at Cincinnati or, a guy that gets drafted here or whatever, I think you're kind of looking at this roster going, hey, look, there might be an opportunity for me here, and I think I could do something. So I don't know. I think, the Bengals have kind of, they're going to throw the ball, but they've also kind of expressed a desire to want to be able to run the ball when they need to. And I mean, frankly, T. Higgins is entering a contract year. Tyler Boyd's entering a contract year. The receiving talent here might dip a little bit, and it probably will dip a little bit, because I can't imagine you're going to keep Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, and Tyler Boyd for forever. So, this team is going to have to rely a little bit more on its run game a little bit. So, if I'm a running back, I'm kind of keeping all of that in mind.
Yeah, I guess Ezekiel Elliott doesn't mind that at all because he's like, hey, well, again, this is reportedly based on Adam Schefter, so we don't know if this is based on his sources. Supposedly the Bengals are one of his teams that he's interested in. Zach Taylor talked with Channel 9, Channel 9 in Cincinnati yesterday at St. X High School at an event there. And I don't know if it was coach speak, but he was like, yeah, we're happy with the guys we have. People will like to put things out there, yada, yada. I mean, if you read between the lines, looked like he was smiling kind of subtly. I don't know. I mean, it's just hard to know with coaches if it's coach speak or not. Maybe he's telling the truth of look, we're happy with what we have. Joe Mixon's still a Bengal. The draft is coming up. Or maybe something's going to drop by midnight after we tape this podcast, and you and I are going to be taping an emergency podcast because of it. Who knows? But it's just hard to say. We don't know what's in people's heads when they're looking at other teams, unless we have it's kind of the smoke, but you got to prove the fire. Where's the fire saying, oh, we don't want to go to Cincinnati because of how they use Mixon and Perine. That's all talk. It's a theory. Who knows? We don't know. We like to assume, right? We like to think we know everything, but we don't. Very last thing before we get going here for the weekend, and speaking of the weekend, on that note, we got the Elite Eight coming up. Thursday, we saw some Sweet 16 action. Tonight, for those listening before the big games, we got the Sweet 16 matchups across the board Friday night. I just want to ask you this first off. Have you ever heard of Florida Atlantic University, Andrew? Did you know about them before this tournament?
Yeah, I did. I know who FAU is.
Are you going to say because of Trey Hendrickson, or do you just literally know who they were?
No, I mean, I know who they are. Lane Kiffin used to coach there. I'm a pretty big college football fan, so
That's right.
I've kind of known about the Owls for a while down in Boca Raton. So they've got a pretty interesting college football history if anybody ever wants to look into that. So.
Yeah, Howard Schnellenberger, man, he was there for a while before he retired too. But no, I bring it up because who would have thought their second time ever in the tournament, never won a tournament game. They beat Memphis last week, survive against Fairleigh Dickinson, which kind of blew my mind. And then Tennessee, of all people, I mean, me being a Kentucky guy, I was by all means excited about that, but they are one win away from the Final Four. If they can beat Marquise Noel and Kansas State And I didn't know who Noel was until this tournament, man. Whether it's people calling him short, playing in his hometown at MSG. I mean, I don't know how much you follow college basketball, but is this just two parts here? Number one, is this the craziest tournament you've seen? And number two, when do you think we'll see a 7 seed in the NFL playoffs, which is like the equivalent, I think, of a 16 seed in March Madness? When is a 7 seed going to win a game in the NFL playoffs, if it's going to happen?
Yeah, eventually, I don't want to make this a college football thing, but, I think sometimes people look at March Madness and they say, oh, how come, we can't do this? How come we can't do this? Like in football, and football is a little bit different. The game is just fundamentally different. So I think, especially when you look at, kind of the 2 seeds and the 7 seeds, like the 2 seeds, you're talking about a team that, damn near got a bye and was the best team in their conference. And, think about it this year, the Bills, you're playing a team that barely snuck into the playoffs. I don't know. I just think, you're certainly going to have it happen eventually. It's just going to be, very, very skewed. So.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, almost happened with the Dolphins and Bills, which I know you and I have different views and opinions on that. The wild card game last year, but I'm waiting for that day. I am waiting for that day. Hopefully we're not covering the losing side of it, because that wouldn't be fun, but I'm waiting for that day where we can look at it and say that's just like what UMBC did to Virginia. Maybe not that extreme, but crazier things have happened. Well, folks, enjoy the weekend. Next week, we're going to talk about the draft. Mike Nizick will join us later next week to pick up where Andrew and I left off on this conversation and all the great conversations we had this week. Again, if you haven't subscribed to our subtext service, Cincinnati Football Insider, make sure you do so. Just text the number that I mentioned at the advertisement earlier in the show. But once again, for myself and Andrew, I'm Muhammad Ahmad. Watch some basketball and enjoy your weekend. And if you're in Cincinnati, stay dry and stay safe.